So I'm going to give you a sort of 25-minute, 30-minute presentation, and I will be here afterwards for a bit if anyone has any specific questions. So for anyone that doesn't know, I'm head of retail at Stylus, and Stylus is a global insights, innovations, and forecasting business. And in this presentation, Liquid Retail, I'm going to give you a whistle-stop tour of a trend series piece, a five-parter that we've literally just published, only last week, in fact. And it's all about exploring how to react and the kind of key strategies you need for a 24-hour, hyper-connected, kind of borderless world that requires individualized, wraparound retail connections, hence Liquid Retail. So there are 5 key component parts to this. So first of all, reflexive retail, live, emotional, and on-demand. Secondly, pause and pulsate, commerce for more chameleonic lifestyles. Thirdly, wraparound retail, IoT-based engagement. Fourthly, beta blends, looking at dexterous and dynamic store spaces, reacting to this digitized world. And finally, tech flex, which is very much focusing on the kind of the new era of work. So firstly, reflexive retail, live, emotional, and on-demand. So this report is very much about capturing the kind of here and now needs and desires based entirely on the individual. So it's almost kind of leapfrogging conventional targeting. And this talks to the fact that consumers are now heavily fatigued by recommendations that treat them like they're essentially just a kind of amalgamation of the things they bought last. When actually what they really want is the thrill and the satisfaction of communicating in a much more direct level, acknowledging them being much more mercurial. So I'm going to kick off with live commerce, by which I mean broadcast-based conversations or consultations. These are really key to achieving that type of relevancy. It's already massive in Asia. So on the right, you've got a shopping app called Live Shop that's basically QVC for social media. But what's critical here in terms of the evolution of QVC, I guess you could say, is that the people watching this can also interact with the influencers. So basically it's social media kind of influencers selling things via this app. And that interaction is what's spurring in-app shopping, something that's easily, of course, transferable to brands via the bloggers that they're using as ambassadors. On the left-hand side, you've got, in Singapore, you've got electronics brands and general retailers that are holding retail auctions on Facebook Live, where the auctioneers can actually kind of banter with the audience while they're doing demos. In terms of shopping, shoppers will actually bid in the comment sections and then they'll message retailers to pay. Unbox is another really brilliant video app. Now this is playing on the insane popularity of the unboxing video phenomenon. 20% of consumers now globally watch unboxing videos, and 62% of those do so while they're researching buying something. The videos on this app are actually grouped into shows that constitute retail categories. So it could be things, sound a bit wild, but things like hottest drones. And users can again chat with the unboxers, or they're also known as air hosts. Now, brands can buy in-app retail links here. So basically, they're kind of paying the network. That's how they get into this, where their products will naturally pop up where somebody's talking about them. And the kind of brands that are already using this are Amazon, Walmart, Apple, and Best Buy. So they're already very much ahead of the curve here. Now, this is currently only for tech products, but with many other sectors across the board, especially in categories like toys and beauty, huge figures for unboxing. There is mileage for numerous brands. Now, when it comes to actual pure retail apps, as it were, one of the best that surfaced in the last year is Hero. Now, this is software that allows people browsing brand websites to click an icon to message available in-store staff, chatting with them via WhatsApp style interface, or video streaming so they can discuss products. Now, associates can see what those browsers using the Hero app those people have browsed or what they've bought. Additionally, and this is really major, because all these conversations are totally traceable, sales can be attributed very accurately, regardless of where the sale happens, whether that's in-store or online. And this, of course, is making that once really fierce dividing line between different store channels, for physical and the digital, irrelevant. And, of course, that's boosting and kind of jumping over this obstacle in terms of omni-channel commerce. Now, the results here are really super compelling. Look at that. The Results here are super compelling. Hero boasts a 10-fold conversion rate uplift compared to people purely just browsing e-commerce sites, and then a 40% uplift in average order value. Looking at that example, it's no coincidence that LVMH has introduced lifestyle and consultations on its new e-commerce site, 24sevra.com, while Zalando's Zalon service uses a questionnaire to match consumers to stylists who will then chat live via a phone or a bot. Now, the world of conversational commerce that I'm talking about here, because it has this capacity to reveal so much more about the way people interact and also react, will also help brands better gauge and deal with live behaviors. Johnny Walker's collaboration with Alexa, or on this voice app, or they call it a skill, is a really great example of this. Now, you can use this skill to learn about whiskey history, to get help choosing products, or get guidance on making cocktails. And the skill can also complete in-app purchases for you, or find you the nearest stockists. Now, the reason I mention this one particularly is because very few Alexa skills are currently truly interactive, and even fewer are responsive in real time. So this really shows that how brands can infiltrate the voice-enabled service era. And this is a space where it's a very, very scary prospect for brands at the moment, this idea of people searching purely by a product type rather than a brand name. So providing value that is practical, but also moving on to a space that's more emotional, will also be key to avoiding that kind of visibility and invisibility in future. So this example is from a UK-based group, actually, an AI specialist called Us AI. And they've developed a mental health chatbot called Subot. Now, this operates primarily through in-ear devices. It does that so it has this kind of extra intimacy. And it asks users how they're feeling each day, and then it will kind of tailor the conversation accordingly. The founder of this company, a guy called Pete Traynor, amazing AI expert, he reveals that those people that thought they were talking to just a pure bot registered a much more satisfying experience than those people that thought they were talking to a bot and humans. They were much more candid, and of course that showed how bots can reveal much more nuanced consumer behaviours, which of course will help brands to deliver much more relevant services. Now, that's especially the case for those brands that can make connections between the chats and other data that consumers have opted to share. So, for instance, it could use health knowledge to spot irrational overspending at times, obviously with the consumer's opt-in, halting buying at those agreed points. Now, Traynor refers to that as conscious capitalism. And while I know that that last example might seem a little bit dramatic, it's something that's increasingly viable as brands have to understand the value of much more long-term relationships over just having kind of short-term sales wins. As Traynor says, brands not using the emotional behaviours, the patterns, the preferences, the way people respond to other people or certain suggestions. These are the patterns that chatbot conversations can shine a spotlight on. So as I say, it doesn't really have to be as dramatic as saving consumers from themselves. Being able to emotionally read a situation correctly is going to be invaluable in any retail scenario. So this is a Chinese piece of software called a Motorbot. And this enables sort of PA bots, things like Alexa, and virtual customer service agents, so the kind of bot you might be speaking to on a site, a brand website, to understand emotion based on a combination of written and audio clues, plus visual tip-offs, movement sensors, and also facial recognition tech. Now, the result here might be changing language to appease somebody getting really frustrated, or gauging the best point that you might want to throw in a free delivery or a discount. Even on a really basic level, there's mileage here. Last Christmas, eBay had a pop-up shop in London that was designed to help sort of very stressed-out shoppers cut through all the noise and make much better gift decisions. And it did so by using facial tracking technology to monitor people's reactions, their kind of unwitting reactions to things as they scroll through products on gift pages of its e-catalogue. And then it would recommend the items that they connected with most. So it's when you're confused about what you like yourself, it will give you the emotion sensing tech will give you a helping hand. So the bottom line, of course, is having a much, much deeper sense of contextual awareness, which can also mean monetizing moments. So Supermarket Waitrose is currently beta trialing a app that targets after-work shoppers, because apparently by about 4 p.m., 40% of us still have no idea what we're going to have for dinner. So this will suggest recipes based on personal preferences, what's in store, but also core ingredients that you might have at home. And that will be judged on your purchasing data, but also combined with algorithms about consumption, etc. And there's also fluidity in terms of engagement, what we're calling haggle tech. Now, this is really fantastically illustrated by this piece of software called Price Waiter. Now, this is software that basically will trigger pop-up dialog boxes with messages on them when it senses that a customer is on the verge of leaving your website, and it will ask if you want to negotiate. The bargaining happens privately with acceptance or rejection relayed by email. Now, this tool has sparked a 9% increase in conversions since it launched just over a year ago. According to consumer psychologist Kate Nightingale, the success of that scheme is very much rooted in the entrepreneurial economy we all live in now. So contrary to this idea that it's all about convenience and just having things quick, whatever, actually the haggle works because people are now less salaried, because they're creating their own wealth, and therefore the sense of getting value for money is key, deepening this desire to haggle. Now, this means more people are demanding intangible benefits from brands and responding to the feeling of being in control, or at least the illusion of it. So on to number 2, pause and pulsate. Now, this is a report that we've written because I think, whether it's vanity-based or whether it's necessity-driven, this idea of versatility is increasingly prized by consumers. Driven on one hand by the update me philosophy of the sharing economy, and on the other, the increasing unpredictability of work and life. So reclaiming resales is key here, because resales are booming, largely thanks to a generation of teen traders that are specifically buying to resell, making pre-owned a really positive thing. Now, lots of this is still peer-driven, but Apple, Samsung, and Maserati even are now all running certified second sections on their website. Commandeering brand fans to be surrogate salespeople through digital technology is trading on this mentality to a whole other level. Now, this is a Chinese car brand called Lynk & Co, and it's got 3 sales models. It's got ownership outright, it's got a car hiring subscription scheme, and it's got leasing with an option to then release. Now, leases pay a monthly fee, a bit like having a mobile phone plan, but then they can claw back credit up to about $20 a day by sharing the car with people on the subscription plan, and they can locate it via a GPS sync map on Lynk & Co's app. Coded messages are actually sent to the renter's mobile phone that will turn the mobile phone, the app on the phone, into a digital key. Now, this is already happening in Sweden, and it's launching in China later this year, which might seem a bit weird being a Chinese business, but it's going to be with the rest of us in US and Europe in 2019. Another example of this really interesting digital scheme is an American omni-demand storage startup called Omni. Now, this lets people rent out personal items. Items here will be collected by a concierge, they'll be photographed, and they'll be digitally indexed. So if you're a user of this, you'll get a digital dashboard with which you can self-set prices. People that want to borrow stuff will request dates from you. The owners will then respond to the inquiries via an app, but Omni just handles all the hassle of the deliveries. Now, this is currently already storing over 100,000 items in America. And again, this is a model that's very applicable to other types of brands like home appliance brands. Now, of course, while Omni is grounded in monetizing consumer entrepreneurship, it's inherently attuned to the idea of lives being in flux. Most people are only going to be renting out their kit because they've had some kind of change in their living circumstances, which connects to another kind of breed of digitized commerce that's based on selling empathy and support. So this example here is a Danish brand called Vigor, which is a totally flexible subscription concept from Denmark that lets new parents switch baby clothes every time their child grows out their last items. Now, these subscriptions run from about 27 months, 1 to 27 months, and they cost about $55, the equivalent of that a month. And the average renters are staying for, at least a year, which is, when you're in that space, it's actually quite a long time. On the back of double-digit growth year on year since they launched in 2015, this has just expanded into maternity wear, and they've also begun partnering with Patagonia on children's outdoor gear and swimwear. Huge growth. Similarly grounded in this sense of uncertainty, another US concept is an on-demand insurance company called Slice, which is targeting the gig economy workers by covering people that are very much in these in-between zones. Things that are created by these sort of blurred personal-professional boundaries that we're now experiencing, but things that traditional insurers absolutely will not touch still. So, for instance, this is covering Airbnb hosts for out-of-contract damages, so it could even be something like noise fines. As its CEO, Tim Attia, says, people don't work for IBM all their life anymore. They do multiple gigs at the same time, including sharing personal assets. Having blown the safety nets and perks of traditional careers, people are looking for coverage elsewhere. Now, vanity-based lifestyle rentals also have huge mileage, thanks to a generation of sort of social media-bred people for whom a regular change of aesthetic is really par for the course. So at one side, you've got furniture at retailer Feather, which bills itself as being for millennials on the move. And it has different price categories, one of which I find quite hilariously is just called Hip. And you can rent entire rooms. Now, this is growing 10% week on week. And then the Parisian fashion startup La Bibliothèque, which offers an infinite wardrobe of contemporary designer clothes for just under the equivalent of $200 a month. And this is doubling its turnover year on year. Brand bendiness is also key, of course, to seducing commitment phobes. So you've got brands including mattress brand, sleep brands Casper, audio brands Sonos, and the fashion brands Zalando are all now offering hefty 100-day free return trial periods. And the attitude with these brands is so liberal that people often don't even have to state why they're returning these things when they do so. I also wanted to touch briefly, because this section is very much about kind of memberships and following people through digitally, on the idea of flex in terms of the transformation economy, helping people optimize themselves. In January this year, the Canadian sports brand RYU offered discounts on new kit, but it will only do so for people that manage to change their shapes. That could be beefing up or losing weight by January 2018. Now, cleverly here, fans had to join its free loyalty program to get involved with this. And of course, it gave them special perks, but what it also gave RYU was much clearer visibility on people's long-term behaviours. As Nightingale says, brands must work on becoming long-term partners because it gives the opportunity to observe customers and help steer them in positive new directions, but rather than based on making these snap recommendations based on what people just simply last bought. But in terms of flexibility, really thinking liquid, the Internet of Things was going to be one of retail's biggest game changers. Now, for anybody that thinks that this might be science fiction, the World Economic Forum predicts 2024 is going to be the tipping point for the IoT. At this point, more than 50% of internet traffic to homes will be for home appliances and connected services. So even at their most basic, IoT-connected products offer really rich engagement opportunities. So on the sort of top two images, you've got Kongbun Activewear, which allows anybody that's got an NFC-enabled smartphone, which is almost universal now, to simply tap tags on clothing to access product info, things like lookbooks. But soon, this concept will allow people to use that to find things like where their nearest gym locations are, local running paths, track their fitness. Sports brand Spiders similarly created a contextually smart ski jacket, which triggers trail maps and weather data, all entirely geotuned to wherever they are, those people are there at the moment. So it's almost like fueling their active lifestyle. And it's as applicable to home concepts. This year's SES show, the big electronics show, Pernod Ricard unveiled a connected cocktail library. So what happens here is spirit dispensers are conceived to kind of replace bottles and make at-home parties much more fun. So the dispensers release specific liquor measures, they register what's full, and then they inform the system what cocktails can then be therefore made with what's left. The related app contains recipes for 300 cocktail recipes, and it can also create shopping lists for people directly. Now, this, of course, provides an opportunity for supermarkets to step in, which very much loops us back to that Johnny Walker and Amazon Alexa example that we looked at earlier. Beyond practicality, there's also the increasingly vital notion of IoT-afforded benefits. So this idea of both intellectual boosts and also upgrading loyalty systems. So for instance, separating just the sort of fans of the brand from people that have actually bought its product, Adidas is giving exclusive content that it's been created with the magazine Hypebeast only to owners of its Ultra Boost Uncaged shoe. So the microsite will only emerge when people tap their phones on the chip-embedded sole of these shoes. There's also the still very valid projects that you may well have seen by the NY fashion brand, Rochambeau, which created an IoT-enabled jacket and cap. And they actually did this with Avery Dennison and also a British IoT agency who was superb, called Everything. Now, what happens here is, again, these people, if you tapped your phone on it, you would get access to real-time information and privileges, things like VIP passes to exhibitions and events and launches. But what's much more significant here is not really what they get. It's the fact that the brand can extend or restrict access anytime they like. So you create a system of loyalty that fluctuates in real time. But it's also the trans brand concepts where retail fully morphs into service commerce, preventing this idea of living services that's really going to define the most successful brands in future. Daljit Singh, who is the principal director at Fjord Agency, summarizes it perfectly, I think, when he says, the 90s gave us the dawn of the desktop. The noughties delivered the mobile revolution. We're now in the era of living services. The digitization of everything has generated fluid consumer expectations, generating the demand for a holistic service. Now that's illustrated in this really interesting concept by Mucho, which is an AI-driven recipe recommendation app that will use voice-activated devices like Amazon Alexa or Google Home to connect recipes, supermarkets, deliveries, cooking, and of course cookers. So for instance, before you leave for work, you could ask Amazon Alexa what you'd like to have for dinner, what should you have for dinner that evening. You'll receive a choice based on the app's prediction, what's already in the fridge, and the ingredients will be delivered during the day. Now, by the time you get home, your connected oven will already be warming to the correct temperature because it will know when you're going to get home because of your smartphone GPS data. And of course, it will know what the recipe requires. Alexa will then guide you through the cooking process when you're at home. So grocery retailers are going to be able to work directly with this app by fulfilling the orders, or potentially they will be able to actually layer Mucho's algorithms into their own apps. According to Juliana Zarate, the founder of Mucho, choice is very much key to making this type of AI stick. She says that choice is vital to keeping the consumer cognitively engaged in the process, because there's a negative potential pushback if consumers end up in a bubble where basically everything is done for them. We give them the choice to reset filters to consciously actually reject recipes. Now, new-gen smart mirrors are also key to feeding this kind of wraparound thinking. Many have gone part of the way there, but really not the whole way there. So, for instance, LG's LTE Magic Mirror currently visually analyzes users' faces and things like weather data, kind of quite basic data, really, to suggest products for people to use with with sort of tutorials. But it could do more if it involved much more real-time recommendations based on people's kind of personal preoccupations, a little bit like I talked about in reflexive retail. So for instance, it could pull from people's personal schedules and or their social feeds. So for instance, it could advise you on a very specific sort of place-appropriate evening look if it spots that there's some kind of event in your calendar, or propose weather-suitable real-time trend currently being advocated by your favourite blogger. More connected still, imagine someone visiting a city for a conference that when they're running in the park near the hotel, find their smart trainers detect an issue with their running technique. The shoes could then send an email to the wearer's smartphone explaining the issue and pinpointing the nearest store to the conference centre. Knowing, of course, what time the conference begins the next day, thanks to opt-in calendar access, the brand could highlight either a relevant workshop or an in-store appointment with an expert at a convenient time. So again, it's all about keeping these critical conversations going and keeping things as relevant as possible. But as I mentioned, really going outside retail and looking trans-industry is what will really count here moving forward. So think of it as complementary commerce. So imagine a personal trainer making recommendations for a week's meals based on their client's exercise regime, which are then picked up via a mediating app by a connected fridge that will then actually order the outstanding ingredients, the stuff you don't have, from an affiliated supermarket. Or take automotive as a key kind of existing IoT interface with cars becoming so much more connected. You know, for instance, Ford has already started working with Alexa. It's been installing this into the dashboards of some of its new vehicles, and it's partnering with Starbucks so that drivers can actually order a coffee via a simple voice command. The voice command will be received by the most relevant store, so that might be based on the driver's habitual kind of driving routes, or for people that aren't such creatures of habits, it will be kind of anchored to the sat-nav directions. So section 4, I'm going to keep this one a little bit short. This is all about how this landscape in flux will alter the physical space, requiring kind of winning stores, I suppose, to be supercharged with agility. Now, this is all about future-proofing for an uncertain climate. It's very much about saluting the creep of a 24-hour culture, as well as the desire for what's trending, and of course, an increasingly service-led experiential retail landscape. So several of those ideas are very much hit upon in this concept by Adidas. Now, this was a retail service concept entirely devised to fuel Adidas's wider strategy concerning being able to react much faster to changing fashion trends. And notably, it's a really creative interpretation of the idea of on-demand retailing, where speed doesn't really have to equate to a jettisoning of the brand's relationship. You know, a lot of these things that are very convenient, unfortunately, are almost about kind of dispelling that relationship altogether. Now, this was called Knit for You, and it was a pop-up store in Bikini Berlin, which allowed visitors to design a sweater and see it produced in under 4 hours. Now, the interesting thing is that participants would receive a QR booklet, which would have a booklet with a QR code attached that would digitally store the details of each stage of the process. So patterns were projected onto their chest in a darkened room, which they could alter with gestural technology. There were many other things they could do as well with RFID tags and changing the color and things like that. So it's a kind of very digitized but personalized process, and much, much speedier than everything we've seen before in that area. You know, the next frontier really is very much a nascent world of physically responsive environments that are able to react to inhabitants as definitely as personalised e-tail pages. Now, this is a pop-up store called With Me, been used by quite a few brands in the States, that has RFID embedded fixtures which release audio informations when consumers pick up things, things like styling advice. Now, additionally, thanks to kind of full RFID tagging, you'll have this wall of 900 mini screens which will move independently towards visitors via beacon tech, according to what's on their profile, assuming they've kind of logged into the store with their With Me app. So, for instance, the shelves would move on sensing that someone's come in and has liked the product that they're very close to within the app. Now, the key to this as well, obviously some of that feels a little bit gimmicky, but the connected fitting rooms are really key here, using this RFID tech. Once inside, what will happen is you hold your phone up to the mirror, so you ask all this stuff to be taken into the changing room, you hold your phone to the mirror, you scan the app, and it will synchronize the room to the clothes that have been selected. You then make this kind of final selection, and anything that's been tried on can be sent to visitors' phones in case they want to order those items later or just consider them later. But adding a sensorial layer to that will also be key, such as you see here in Nike's motion reactive visitor control installations at its experiential Nike Lab spaces that were in New York and London. Now, in London, what happened was a mini tornado of steam was initiated when people approached it. And as they actually put their hand into the vortex, the tornado would shift around them, while proximity sensors triggered projections and kind of rain, etc., on what was around them. So the idea was to create a sort of space that was like a bubble, according to those to the individual. Taking that a little bit further, last year, the Italian design research agency Carlo Ratti Associati created a system allowing heating, lighting, and cooling systems to follow occupants around them as if they were in these, talking of bubbles, actual kind of sense bubbles. So while the occupants could actually set preferences via an app, IoT tech also monitored existing conditions, real-time conditions, so things like occupancy levels, temperature, lighting, CO2 concentration, to instigate further change. So you can see that this kind of concept has considerable mileage when you're looking at kind of performance-based concepts, as seen at Nike. As Ratti says, new digital technologies and distributed intelligence have had the potential to transform the role of architecture. Imaginal spatial design that adapts to human need, character, and desire rather than the other way round. And then finally for this section, there's vampire vending, the after-hour concepts catering to 24-hour living, and the demise of the traditional 9 to 5. Two things that are sending nocturnal shopping habits soaring. Look firstly here to Wheelie's Mobile Mart, a micro shop that can summon to any neighbourhood shop via an app, a little bit like ordering an Uber. The app will then unlock the doors to it and help you add items to a digital basket. You've also got the Airtime's Touch, which is a really quite brilliant concept. It's a motion sensor bar that will transform any store window into a kind of interactive screen, and that's regardless of weather conditions. So what happens here is hand gestures would allow people to activate videos, will let you kind of zoom into things, a bit like pinching on a screen. You can watch videos and you can add goods to a basket. You can actually buy things then by tapping a mobile phone or credit card onto an NFC-enabled sensor. So ideal for keeping your store open when the store isn't technically open. So the fifth and final section, this is something that for anybody here that's aware of Stylus, this is also a report that's in our new huge piece of work that launches tomorrow about the work-life revolution. This is looking at how omni-era communications and the death of the 9 to 5 that I just mentioned are necessitating sales floor flexibility. So this is very much all about sort of shop floor tools. So one of the key things here is this rise of intuitive zeitgeist tapping technology. Basically things that kind of tap into the sort of interfaces, obviously particularly social media, that are being used beyond retail. Now, a hero that you saw earlier is really, really key to mention here because the way that it uses sales associates' own phones and the WhatsApp interface. So it almost creates a kind of mini broadcast system, which makes training and adoption super fast, very lightweight. Ostensibly, Hero works because it's cultural tech, says its founder, Adam Levine. Note that 5% of consumers are already messaging sales associates using screen grabs taken from Instagram. The Boston store of Sephora now has downsized its advisors' tech from tablets to iPhone 7s, which hold all its latest apps, including even the virtual trialing technology. Now, this is a really seminal shift towards less visible technology, and it's very much driven by consumer preferences. 60% of Gen Z, so that's kind of teenagers, ostensibly, would prefer now to use their own devices rather than in-store tech to interact with brands. Now, this is exemplified really interestingly in Foot Locker's Behind the Sneaker series. This was an initiative from the very beginning of this year, actually, where key storytelling information about the shoes that were on display was accessed via visitors' own headphones and their smartphones, basically by them simply connecting to a dedicated URL. That wider shift towards kind of more experientially led, culturally inflected store commerce, as I talked about a little bit in Dexterous Design, will also demand tools that let sales associates use brand spaces more creatively, allowing them to be much less restricted by conventional touch points. Voice-activated tools, virtual prompts, and wearables will be the key assets to invest in here, as epitomised by a new voice-assisted selling app by a US company called Theatro. Now, this allows sales associates to summon products on content or tablets or even huge digital displays in stores purely by using their voice. So it keeps these lines of communication fabulously open. There's also possibilities for clienteling tools, including AI memory triggers that connect sort of in real life connections with e-behaviors. So a couple of the best for me are British-based software platform Proximity Insights. Now, the major USP for this one is empathetic AI. So this monitors consumer requests and reactions to content and product online after people have been in store, but it also lets sales associates manually make notes on the systems when they're talking to people in the store. So it almost works like a kind of cross-platform notepad. Salespeople will then get nudges later, and quite often sequentially, so it will be a kind of following up in 3 days, and then 7 days, and then 2 weeks, all from a centralized dashboard that basically prompts them to make kind of follow-up conversations that are actually going to be viable and relevant. Now, critically, the follow-up messages here are always personal. They're never automated. So although the background is automated, the final reaction isn't. And this is something that's been proven, we have plenty of statistics on this, to generate far more sales later than any kind of freebies of any kind do. Similarly, you've also got on the left-hand side a concept called New Store, which is American, which is founded on kind of seamless omni-service to the extent that actually you can simultaneously view your products simultaneously as in you and the store associate when it's being sent to you. Quite luxury-based, that one. As Casey Antonelli, Director of Corporate Communications for New Store, says, we refer to it as streaming retail, a notion that goes beyond omni-channel, taking an on-demand stance. But I wanted to finish with an example that's really quite futuristic, but very relevant, introducing the idea of flexperts, specifically the premise of AI replication to substitute flexi-time staff in their absence. As Pete Traynor, who I mentioned earlier, says, in the gig era, using ad hoc experts and topic specialists, even for very short periods in stores, is going to become much more valuable than using generalists. But how can this realistically happen? Well, via the development of AI-birthed bots and avatars that are emulating real people to ensure that brands' best teams are virtually available, even when they're physically absent. So, for instance, there's a US company called Replica who's literally using AI to kind of absorb the personalities of its most popular store assistants. There are several banks that I can't name that it's starting to work on this as well to kind of really beef up their customer service. Meanwhile, Traynor, I'm not sure if this is confidential, possibly, but he's already working on replicating the kind of thinking and the kind of direction of a Russian oligarch, because this person actually wants to be able to control their own wealth post-mortem. Maybe not that weird. So some future insights to leave you with here. Firstly, be support-centric. Consumers are increasingly tuned to the idea of brands becoming enablers, setting the stage to shift into kind of support services. So whether it's accelerating careers or helping people's lives when they're in limbos and these transitional phases, using flexible e-service plans to demonstrate longer-term assistance will be key to eliciting loyalty, and also enjoying access to much more nuanced behavioural patterns. Secondly, have faith in flexibility. Thinking of consumers as individuals whose needs and desires change daily rather than maybe just seasonally or monthly is going to be key to elevating brand-consumer bonds. So whether it's the haggle tech that I mentioned or emotion recognizing AI bots that can literally change the script per user, reflexiveness is going to be a defining characteristic, I believe, of the next decade's most successful brands. Thirdly, grab the IoT. The IoT in its capacity to create the connections between product, place, brand, and service is absolutely going to be one of retail's biggest game changers. So I would highly recommend partnering with an IoT agency ASAP to connect the dots between audience, their lives, and your business. Fourthly, relate beyond retail. You know, retail is absolutely at its best when it's sensitively, of course, attuned to consumers' needs and preoccupations beyond just shopping. So whether it's IoT-fueled engagement or culturally relevant stores, to the AI tools that can kind of automatically link how consumers are behaving and talking even to one another and reacting to things across channels. It's very much about using context to boost commerce. Fifthly, operate live. Live communications are becoming the bedrock of media culture overall. And it's really triggering a kind of stampede from consumers towards concepts that use initiatives that are both live but also interactive. So whether it's live auction sites or the micro-broadcasting software that marries the sort of physical and digital retail spaces, trade on that kind of humanizing thrill of instant connections. And finally, make on-demand meaningful. Convenience-centric concepts, are obviously very important when it comes to modern commerce, but speed without having any type of dialogue can really derail brand-consumer relationships. So whether it's voice-activated assistants that provide a menu of options subtly, or e-tools that allow consumers to kind of finish the final layer of a product or design, adding choice to your technology will make sure it doesn't feel dictatorial and that your consumer feels entirely in control. That's it from me. Thank you.